Good morning, everyone. There's still a few people about to join us, but most of us are now actually logged on to onto the event. And it's great that so many of you are here today to hear about our QES results for Q2. They've been playing out over the last few weeks when we've been running our business monitor through this very trying times, and also to have a little look forward as to what may be coming up over the next couple of months. What we're going to do today is, in a minute, I'll hand over to Subrah to go through the results of the QES Q2 survey. Then once we've had that, I'll do a little piece over some of the issues and ideas that we're looking at over what needs doing to the economy, both at a local level, maybe to national level as well, to guide us through the next stage of recovery. And then we'll have time for questions and answers and any comments that people may well have, and we'll be done for about 12 o'clock. Normal Zoom rules apply, so if I can please ask you, as I've already just done, but just a quick reminder, please mute your mic. If anybody has got any questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end. Use your raise hand facility on the chat, or put something in the chat, just type the question, and we'll pick it up as and when we go through that. We are recording the event, so just be aware of that, and what we'll be doing, we'll be putting that up on the Chamber YouTube channel as quickly as we possibly can. So like I said, that's what the morning will look like. Just moving on now. So a little overview really about what the QES is and the quarterly economic briefing. The QES, as you can see there, is the largest and most reliable business confidence survey in the UK. It's the first to be published each quarter, and it's used to determine economic decision making. Sample size really does matter. Better the response rate, the more accurate the results are. And we like to think that we get, a couple of 100, 300, 400 responses every quarter to this. So we really do have our finger on the pulse, and it's a proper representative size of business sentiment. How reliable? Very reliable. And as we'll see as we go through this morning's presentation as well, that reliability, even in times of huge economic crises, is still in there. So what we produce today on the QES is very accurate and is also a great indicator for what may lie in the future. We like to get our results out pretty quick. We closed this survey in the last 7 days. Subrah and the team quickly turned that around and got the results here ready for presentation today. And what do we do with the information? All the way through the last 3 or 4 months that we've been facing the issues around COVID-19, we've been presenting this to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Subrah's been heavily involved with the British Chambers of Commerce, speaking to the Bank of England, the Treasury and other government departments to really make sure they're aware of what is going on as regards the local economy here in Greater Manchester and what you, our business members, are telling us. So this survey really does matter. It always has mattered, but it probably matters even more as we stand here today now, looking at where we are, where we've been, but more importantly, where we need to go to in the future. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do now is hand over to Subrah, who'll take you through the presentation. Subrah. Subrah?
Sorry, I just started speaking and then realized that I have made what I always do, which is to not unmute myself. But so here I will start again. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. That was a very timely reminder, a very important one of that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. This quarter's QES, without doubt, is one of the most important of our lifetimes. And probably in my lifetime, this is the most important. And that's because the COVID-19 pandemic has caused an economic crisis like no other, okay? Comparisons have been made with the 2008-2009 recession, but there are some differences which I will get to later between 2008-2009, other recessions, and why COVID-19 is slightly different. So to those of you who participated in the survey and gave your responses, thank you. You have participated in a decisive piece of research, the results of which will have a certain degree of influence on policymaking here regionally in Greater Manchester, but also nationally. And to those of you who did not respond to the survey, you missed this boat, but all is not lost. We are opening up our Business Monitor series of surveys later this week, so you can still contribute to that. Because here is the important thing. The results of the QES are based on what you, our members, and Greater Manchester's business leaders have told us. And all I'm doing is replaying your own responses back to you, but with added context and commentary. Okay, so let's get into the QES. Now, what are we going to look at this morning? We'll look into the Greater Manchester Index. And as you know, the Greater Manchester Index is the single most important economic indicator for our city region. We will look into the component parts of the Greater Manchester Index: business confidence, domestic demand, overseas demand. We'll look into some sectoral analysis. But importantly, what I want to do is to weave the results of our business monitor surveys. And that's because the story and the key message from the QES results is a pretty straightforward one. And I'm sure you know this already. Most economic measures have shifted southwards. And Chris used the analogy of the Titanic, that this is the Titanic QES because everything is going down. But what is interesting is if we combine the results of the business monitor surveys with the QES, we actually get a picture of how Greater Manchester's economy has changed in the last 3 months. Some for the worse, some definitely for the better. Okay, and so together the QES and the business monitor survey contribute to a powerful narrative that is very important for policymaking. And I'm sure Chris, Clive, I, Susanna, etc., we have all been telling decision makers about what the key issues of concern here in Greater Manchester are. So therefore, this morning, we will go through the Greater Manchester Index. Chris, if I might have the next slide, please. Chris is driving the slides for me this morning because of my excellent broadband issue. And I'm going to be starting a campaign called Better Broadband for Subrah, and I'm hoping you will all support that campaign. So thank you, Chris. So the Greater Manchester Index is the single most important economic indicator, as I was said. It is made up of 7 different QES measures that give an indication of the health of the Greater Manchester economy. And those 7 measures are domestic demand, 2 measures, international demand, confidence, and then capacity utilization, all of which are big economic indicators. Next slide, please, Chris. So before we get into the Greater Manchester Index for this quarter, let's just recap to get a view of what the context was. You know, what was Greater Manchester's economy like before the pandemic struck? Now, actually, Greater Manchester's economy was in a reasonably good place in Q1 2020. One caveat there. The fieldwork for Q1 QES was done between late February and early March, so it is likely that it did not capture the full effects of COVID-19. But it is also reflective of the fact that we entered 2020 with a stable government in place. We had some clarity on Brexit. Some promises had been made about big ticket investment projects, infrastructure investment. And so the level of 32.9 in Q1 2020 was actually pretty good. It was a significant increase from the level of 13.1 in Q4 2019. Okay, but macroeconomic data did capture the effects of COVID-19. And as you know, the supply chain disruptions in international trade started towards the end of February. In March, the effects had been felt in Europe. And then by end of March, there was a massive downturn. And so Q1 GDP was around 2%, but all 3 service sectors, all 3 sectors declined, services by nearly 2%, construction output declined by more than 2.5%. Okay, so we were in a good place as we were starting to feel the impacts of COVID-19. Next slide, please, Chris. And this is what it is looking like now. Okay, the Greater Manchester Index has actually gone down from 32.9 to negative 31.7. And as you can see, this is the lowest it was ever. The lowest during the 2008-2009 recession was around minus 25. So it is a full 6 points lower than it was in 2008-2009 during that great recession. Understandably, it is the business to consumer sector which has been most affected by this. Although other sectors have also been affected, construction was affected, manufacturing was also affected earlier on, but B2C sectors suffered the most. And in Greater Manchester, B2C sector is extremely important. It's about 15% of the economy, accounts for more than 20% of employment. And hospitality decreased by 41%, wholesale and retail by 15%. So we are now in a situation where 33,000 workers, Greater Manchester workers, approximately 30% of the entire workforce in Greater Manchester is now on furlough. 43,000 COVID-19 grants have been paid out to eligible businesses. So this is business rates relief, the retail relief, etc., worth nearly $500 million. Okay. So we are in a spot of bother at the moment, no hiding that. But there is some good news, and I will reserve the good news for later in the presentation, but there is certainly some good news to come. And we will look into the component parts of the Greater Manchester Index. So first, domestic demand. Now, no surprises here. Since the pandemic has struck, we have had a significant reduction in demand. Current sales is down for all three sectors. Advanced orders are also looking down for all three sectors. And so the story is the same. And as I said, the pandemic badly affected the services sector group, and this is where activity levels have shrunk the most. The one sector that has probably not been talked about enough is construction. And construction sites were closed earlier on in March, April. Some sites have since reopened, so activity levels are picking up. But the key concern for the construction sector is future pipeline. Projects that would have been awarded in the last 3-4 months have not necessarily been awarded. They're all on hold for various reasons. And so the concern for the construction sector, somewhat reflected in the domestic orders chart on the right, is what is going to be the pipeline for the future? What is going to sustain the activity levels? Construction, again, a very important sector for Greater Manchester's economy, accounts for nearly 9% of value add. And so the dotted green line on the right-hand side is actually the lowest of the three sector groups. So there are some concerns about the construction sector. That is not to say the other sectors haven't been affected. Manufacturing has also been affected. So domestic demand, that's the picture. Next slide, please, Chris. Yeah, thank you, Chris. On international demand, again, the picture is not particularly different there. Activity levels have gone down significantly. International demand has been an interesting thing because there has been some activity happening even during the crisis because of medical equipment coming in, personal protection equipment coming in, and so on. We had a recent call with members of our freight and logistics group, and they made two important observations. One was that Chinese exports, China being the largest exporter in the world, Chinese exports actually started declining during the Chinese New Year time. So that's February, and they have stayed low since then. They're starting to recover now. And because supply chain was disrupted, sea freight has been very badly affected since February, March. Although sea freight is starting to look up, and so the expectations are that towards the end of Q2, so later this month, and Q3 expectations are actually much better than what was initially feared. And for international trade, we do have an excellent Greater Manchester proxy, which is the number of export documents that are processed by our colleagues in the international trade team. So Susanna and her team who process export documents have calculated that the number of documents processed in the same period this year is lower by almost a quarter. So we know that Greater Manchester's international trade activity has been affected. Of course, QES is capturing exports, but we know that imports have also been affected, and there are some concerns for businesses which are engaged in international trade activities. Okay. So the picture for international trade is very similar to domestic trade. Now on to some other important macroeconomic measures. Capacity utilization, extremely important. So on capacity utilization, if you remember my presentation in Q4 2019, for those of you who attended it, I said the manufacturing sector has actually taken a turn for the better. And capacity utilization was better. Cash flow positions in the manufacturing sector was also getting better towards the end of 2019. Services sector and manufacturing, not so much, but the story now is the same. from capacity utilization at about 60% for manufacturing, approximately 40% for services and construction, they have all come down to single digits or are standing near 10%. So this is the worst operational capacity that we have seen for businesses in Greater Manchester in a long, long time. And this was certainly not the case in 2008, 2009. So these are some of the concerns for businesses. It's about future business volumes and how capacity utilization can go up. Cash flow positions. Now, this has been a very serious concern for businesses. And in our Greater Manchester Business Monitor surveys, this has come up again and again. And you have told us that cash flow is a grave concern with demand at historic lows, delays in payments, invoices not being promised, paid as promised, workers on furlough and so on. Cash flow positions, working capital positions were very badly affected. This is true for all three sectors. Now, I did see a turnaround, and that was towards the end of April, the beginning of May, and it was when Treasury paid out the salary subsidy grants for workers on furlough. Local authorities paid out the rate relief grants, etc., to small businesses. That's when there was a feeble improvement in cash flow positions. But it is certainly nowhere near pre-pandemic levels. And pre-pandemic levels were low, if you remember. And that was because of uncertainty towards the end of last year on Brexit and that sort of thing. So it is not even recovered back to pre-pandemic levels. We will look into recovery later, but this is an important thing to bear in mind. And this is not something which was picked up earlier on. And I remember a very early call with the Bank of England and some civil servants where they were saying, actually, IT companies and businesses who could provide remote working solutions would actually do very well at that time. And I cautioned them against it. And I cautioned them on the basis of the Greater Manchester Business Monitor surveys, in which we had found out that discretionary spend was almost zero because of low cash flow positions. So when discretionary spend is zero, it is highly unlikely that businesses are going to be spending on putting in new technology. They are not going to make business investment at that time. And we will, we'll have to wait for some more time before cash flow positions actually turn around. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. So here's the thing, demand is low. We have capacity utilization at its lowest ever levels. Cash flow positions are precarious. And given all of that, it is hardly surprising that a business confidence is also on the lower side. And this is what happens in any recession. Demand goes down, liquidity crunch it comes in, and then a business confidence goes down. The single most important concern for most businesses is future trading. Are they going to be able to keep up with their revenues? And that is the single most important. And this is based on results that you have told us. And across all three business sector groups, there is a problem here because business confidence is at its lowest ever levels again. Now, many businesses are stuck with a lot of stock. They are facing poor cash flow positions. And it is likely that there will be some discounting in the future. So not only are businesses facing reduced trading volumes, they're also stuck with stock, which they might have to clear at a discount if necessary. That means the prospects for both confidence in turnover and confidence in being able to maintain margins are both on the lower side at the moment. So that's the bottom line. Let's just quickly turn to some concerns that you have expressed, Chris. So can we go on to the next slide, please? So these results are based on a combination of QES and Business Monitor, okay? And as I was saying, the single most important concern for businesses is the reduced business volume, okay? 93% of businesses are concerned about this. And that level has stayed almost the same. It has been between 85 and 95% ever since the end of March, which is when we started the Business Monitor service. The second biggest concern, understandably, is cash flow and working capital. But there are also concerns about staff availability. Business rates is a very important concern. It is a major concern for the worst affected sectors, retail, hospitality, etc. There is a major concern around business rates. But there is also an impact on the supply chain. So while hospitality businesses, while some retail businesses have been recipient of grants which are provided by local authorities, their supply chain has still been badly affected. And the prospects for the supply chain are still some time away. So there are these concerns. And what I have done on the right-hand side is to combine some of the free text comments. So we had an open-ended question in the survey, and I've drawn together some free text comments. And, they are reflective of what you would possibly expect. The council was slow to provide the COVID-19 grants, in some cases to care homes, but also this is something that has come up with other business sectors as well. This is an extremely dangerous and worrying time for hospitality, because the government has, of course, published guidance, but there are still a lot of ambiguity on it, especially on the fact that what the government has said is hospitality businesses, restaurants, etc., can actually expand to outside. They can have tables on the outside. But here's the problem. Businesses who want to expand to the public realm also need a licensing. So they need to apply for fresh licenses. There are no guidance yet around what the provisions may be for issuing that type of license. Businesses don't know whether there is a cost to it. We have learned from some other chambers that local authorities in those areas are actually charging a pretty high fee for license changes on that. So again, there are those concerns which are being expressed. And then I find something else which is interesting, which is obviously some people are saying, well, the government's message on stay home has been too successful. So now workers don't want to return to work. Shoppers don't want to return to shops. People will not want to eat out, etc. That's definitely a concern. But on the other hand, there are also some who have said, well, actually, lockdown is ending too early. Is there going to be a second wave? And if there is a second wave, then the economic impact of that second wave might be a lot worse than what we have already seen. So these are concerns, again, based on comments that you have given us. So from concerns on to labor market. Chris, so next slide. So very quickly on labor market and business investment. Again, no surprises there. Let's just look into that blue bar on the left-hand side. So this is a simple percentage, the percentage of respondents who have actually attempted to recruit in that relevant period. So, it has roughly been between 50 and 60% over the last 6-7 quarters. It's now 10%. And again, there is no surprise there. So 10% of businesses alone are trying to actually recruit staff. And most of that recruitment has been on part-time staff. The businesses which have recruited are either involved in logistics, in some cases. Some of them are involved in health and social care. So very few sectors have actually added staff in the last few weeks. So the outlook for recruitment at the moment is actually quite low. And the same applies to a business investment as well. Okay, cash flow positions are down. There is uncertainty about what the future business volume is going to be. And therefore, capital expenditure on plant and machinery, equipment, etc., is low, the prospects for that. But also businesses might be unwilling to spend huge amounts on training. Again, that has some concerns about, upskilling, retraining of workers for new jobs, and so on. Okay, so that's on business investment and workforce. And the good news is, there ends my bad news. So let's look into some of the good news slides. Okay, so the chart on the left, this is an interesting one and a colorful one. So what I have done is to break down the responses in the Business Monitor survey by the type of the response. So in the second week, and this is the first week of April, so the second week of the Business Monitor survey, lockdown measures fully impacting businesses here in GM, 81% of the respondents said sales are expected to go down. Now that has since changed. So the latest data showing only 50% of businesses are reporting that they expect sales to decline further, okay? So please remember, this is not indicative necessarily of a recovery yet, but what it shows is that there is a stabilization. So levels have gone down, they have stabilized, so they are not in free fall. So good news to that extent. And at the same time, the number of stay same responses, that orange bar in the middle, has actually gone up. So it's now roughly at about 30%. But in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the number of increased responses, so increase in sales responses, have actually also gone up. And I'm using domestic demand, current sales, as an example here. The picture is similar to other QES measures as well. So that's one important piece of good news. And the second piece of good news is the ability of businesses to start trading after implementing the COVID-19 guidelines. Okay, so we asked businesses, are you able to implement the COVID-19 guidelines issued by government and then start trading? And 75% of the respondents saying, actually, we are able to start trading now. It may be partial resumption rather than full resumption, but it is clear that you are all keen to implement safe and working guidance practices and then actually start resume your trading activities. You know, let's get back to normal is the single most important message coming from that. Next slide, please, Chris. So here's another good news, but also some massive changes there in how the economy has responded. So this is national data, bear in mind, this is not Greater Manchester on its own. And the first is retail sales index, okay? And retail sales have actually picked up in the last few weeks. So between April and May, there was that significant increase in retail sales. It is still not 100%, so it is still lower than where it was, but there was an improvement between April and May. And the other important thing is that blue line at the bottom. And this is on internet sales. For the past 2 or 3 years, I think since the beginning of 2017, internet sales have stayed at roughly 20% of overall retail sales. It is now up to 1/3, okay? So that's the impact that the pandemic has had on retail. And especially this has got some bad omens for the high street, okay? Internet sales are now 1/3 of total retail sales. And the chart on the slide, I've just broken down internet sales by the type of stores. So non-store retail, so this would be your ASOS, Amazon, etc., who are exclusively trading online. They have had a 280 billion boost in the last 3 months. But other shops, you know, non-food stores and food stores have also had an increase of about 200 million. So additional 200 million in sales in 1 quarter, all happening via online channels, okay? That is a significant improvement. And so this is probably indicative of some changes in business models going to appear in the future, okay? And I think this is a trend that is going to stay the same. That is not to say, you know, internet sales will continue to be at 33% or increase further, but I think it is going to stabilize at some of those levels. And then finally, next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so this is my claim to fame. So you have heard of the L-shaped recovery, the V-shaped recovery, the W-shaped recovery. Which one is it going to be? And I'm going to say that it is going to be a tick mark shape or a Nike swoosh shaped recovery. And again, this is not me inventing something from my hat. This is based on other research, but this is what the data is showing. So what I've done there is to draw a trend line based on a forecast of data that we have gathered ever since the end of March. And clearly that is indicative, neither of a V nor a U, but this is what it is looking like. It is a Nike swoosh type recovery. There are going to be additional improvements that is going to happen in Greater Manchester. So last Monday, when non-essential retail opened, 200 non-essential stores actually opened in Manchester city centre. Footfall in Manchester city centre and the area around Market Street was 90% down compared to the same period last year. But on Monday, last Monday, when non-essential retail opened, that had gone down to something like 55% down compared to the previous year. So there is clearly some pent-up demand from consumers, and consumers are wanting to return to the shops. And the other bit of good news is the Purchase Managers Index. This is for the services sector, due to be published, I think, tomorrow, but the forecast is that it will improve to 40 from 29. So there is a lot of bad news. You know, the economy has had a massive shave over the last 3 months, but there is some good news now, and especially coming in the last few days. So my final slide, macroeconomic outlook. Next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so the macroeconomic outlook. So as I said, there is going to be an economic contraction. We are not going to escape that. And it is highly likely that some businesses will go into administration, and consequently there is a risk of employment. And there is also a risk of employment as the furlough scheme comes to an end towards the end of October, I think it is. But the latest forecasts are that the fall in GDP is actually going to be less severe than what was feared initially. So initially, the fear for fall in GDP for 2020 as a whole was 15 to 18%, but now most expectations is that between 7 and 10% decrease in the economy likely. Again, my estimate for Greater Manchester's GVA cut probably going to be between 12 and 14%, and that's because consumer sales, so hospital, motor trades, wholesale, retail, hospitality, accommodation, and food services are an extremely important sector for GM. 23% of employment, 14% of local economy. And so a revival in these sectors is extremely important. So based on that, I expect a GVA reduction for Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester's GVA is roughly at 70 billion per year. I expect it might come down by between 12 and 14%. That's the worst case scenario. But again, that might be moderated by the fact that consumer response to retail reopening indicates a gradual recovery. And then on other macroeconomic news, you would have heard this last week, the Bank of England is maintaining the base rates at 0.1%. It is also adding 100 billion to quantitative easing. So they're going to be purchasing more government bonds. That will take quantitative easing to a total of 745 billion. And that's approximately 315 billion more than what it was in February. So since February, the Bank of England has added nearly 315 billion to quantitative easing. And that's mainly to support the government schemes. Job retention scheme is costing approximately 55 billion alone, let alone the other schemes. But here's the important thing, and this is what Chris will lead on in a moment. All of the support measures that the government have announced over the past few months is only to cushion the impact, okay? It is not necessarily tailored towards a recovery in the economy. And what we will need, no doubt, is a set of further measures. And that could include reform measures, business rates being one, but also possibly a VAT cut, the German style. And Germany announced a 130 billion euro package, which included VAT cuts, innovation funding, and extension to the furlough by up to 2 years, and so on. And so here is my key message. If we have to recover from this crisis, we need other measures intended to bolster consumer confidence and get business investment back on. And that is central to ensuring that we are saving jobs here in GM and the rest of the country. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris. If you have any questions, we will pick them up in a short while. Chris, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Subrah, and apologies for the slides going backwards and forwards a little bit there. There's a bit of a pause when I'm pressing the button, so it doesn't look like it's working, and then it fires forward. So anyway, do apologies for that. So try and control it a little bit better from now on. Some really interesting stuff there from Subrah, and again, just to re-emphasise and remind people, this isn't stuff we've made up. This is coming direct from business. This is what you're telling us, you're seeing, you're feeling in the economy at the present moment in time. Some really fascinating information, which we'll come back to. But as Subrah said, what we want to do now is really begin to look at what needs doing by way of planning for that recovery. As we've seen, there's been an historic collapse in demand, really. And as we've seen, there is a support package of £330 billion that's already in there. Again, as Subrah said, that's really just to deal with the immediate emergency response. we now have to look at what's needed going forward by way of economic recovery. You heard a lot prior to the pandemic, and obviously on the back of the general election in December, around the levelling up agenda, Boris Johnson's levelling up agenda. But that needs further investment and reform measures. That's not just going to carry on as it was beforehand. There needs extra work doing to it now to take into effect the impact from COVID, but also as well, making sure that we don't continue not to address the problems that existed before COVID-19. You know, the economy was split. There were some real big issues in the national economy before COVID-19 hit. We can't ignore them, but we've got to do something to address everything in one go. And we've also, I think, got to think beyond big ticket infrastructure projects. Yes, it is important that infrastructure investment continues, but it's not just about that. We've got to look at more local issues as well and other areas of the economy that's got to be impacted. And let's set all this in the context of another major issue. The government has ruled out an extension to the Brexit transition period. So by the end of December this year, if things don't improve from where they are at the present moment in time, we will crash out with no deal. And that could be another major economic impact right on the back of what we're seeing at the present moment in time. Our response at the Chamber has been to put together a paper called The Way Forward, and that's split into 4 areas: transport, health, the economy, and our communities. And what we wanted to do today was really begin to look at the economy bit of that and begin to get your feedback both on some of these issues and some of the responses that have been made to the quarterly economic survey, because it's so important that you help drive this recovery forward. You've got to tell us what you need in your businesses, and we can go out there and do our best to make sure that can be delivered for you. So some of the issues and some of the things that we really do want to get your feedback on, and this isn't just going to finish today, this is going to be a series of other events that we're doing going forward. But again, we just want to make sure that we get right on the back of the QES results some real big economic ideas. So there's a series there of 8 or so points really. So what financial and non-financial support do businesses need as the CJRS, that's the job retention scheme, the furlough schemes, tapering starts and the scheme ends in October. Part-time furloughing starts in July and the scheme itself is due to end at the end of October. That's 3 or 4 months though, it begins to decrease. Employer contributions start to increase as well. But again, that's just assuming that all sectors are equal. We know for a fact that all sectors aren't equal. The hospitality industry in particular is still and probably will be one of those hardest hit going forward. We've seen all the loan schemes come out, the interruption loan schemes, the bounce back loan schemes, and there's all sorts of deferred liabilities as well, including things around VAT payments, business rates, all the rest of it. But obviously that means that payback day is around the corner. So how can we make sure that people all of a sudden doesn't fall off a cliff edge in 3 or 4 months' time when this money starts to fall due? Local authorities have been right at the heart of this. They've been getting money through from central government to be able to share that with businesses, primarily through the business rates scheme, looking at various elements of that. But there are unspent grant funds sitting there within the local authorities. They're as keen to get that out to people as people are keen to accept it. But we just got to make sure that A, people are aware of it, and B, if there is any leftover and unspent funds, how can they be best utilised? Because you know as well as I do, if it doesn't get spent, the Treasury will just take it back. And we've got money here locally in Greater Manchester we can do something with. Preserving jobs, creating new jobs will be absolutely essential, especially looking around the issues of youth unemployment. But what more can we be doing with that? What reforms are needed in skills and training? This is something we've been working on for years and years and years, it seems. We have problems, again, like I said, going into COVID-19, but what now needs doing to make sure that in the new world going forward, skills and training forms that fundamental part there to help people who may be at risk of unemployment or to help those people that are actually unemployed. And what changes are needed in local taxation? Business rates, for example, is a great example of that. For years and years, we've all been saying the system doesn't work. Now we're facing a unique set of new challenges on the high street and elsewhere the figures in the QES presentation around internet shopping, quite startling, £200 million uplift in the space of 1 month. These are the challenges that people are facing on the high street, and yet we've got an antiquated, outdated system in business rates that's not really working very well and certainly not helping anybody. And what changes are needed to improve business and consumer confidence? There's been a lot of talk over the weekend. There's more this morning over the Chancellor looking at potential VAT cuts. Is that something that's necessary? That's what happened in 2008, 2009, just to give the economy a bit of a spark. Is there a way that we should be looking at certain sectors? Is there a way, for example, of looking at the whole thing around a net zero carbon economy, maybe taking all VAT off electric vehicles? There's got to be some different way of doing things, and little piecemeal changes may not be enough on the challenges that we face going forward. So that's all I really want to say about that, just to set the scene and just to get the brains going a little bit this morning. So we're going to throw it open now. So if anybody has got any questions they want to raise, if you want to use the raise hand facility on the participants list, if you just press raise hand, you'll pop to the top, or there may be something that we've got in the chat room. I've noticed that Anne Gornall has made a point really around the skills bit and saying reforms, there needs to be significant skills training initiatives and how to capital on these for business, especially for young people. Anne, do you want to just unmute yourself and just add in a little bit more about that? Because obviously this is such an important part of what we're looking at recovery. Is there anything in particular you've got in mind about that?
Hi, hello everybody. Yes, actually what I meant to say, but it didn't come out as it should have, there will be significant skills and training initiatives. There absolutely will be. We're expecting, I think Clive will know this from the ESAP group, about over 100 million coming into the area for skills training. The trick is how to capitalise upon that investment for business. Make sure it's not dead wood, make sure it's what business wants. So, and I've added vitally for young people, because we've seen before that whole cohort of young people gets leapfrogged over. So I think the Chamber and the network, we've been talking to each other initially, can think about how we address what would work really effectively with and for business going forward.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne. And that again is something that's going to be come back to time and time again, because it is such an important issue. And if anybody's got any thoughts on that, please share them with us. That would be absolutely very welcome indeed. The danger is with some of this that you get almost like reinventing the wheel, that something does need changing very quick and very rapidly, but because it's easier just to go back to what we were doing 12 months ago, almost by default you find yourself slipping back there. Michael Morris has asked a question there about helping people return to work with lockdown related emotional and mental health issues. I think that's picking up on the point that Subrah made in the concerns around that. Michael, do you want to add anything else to that? Can you unmute yourself? No? Okay, right, fair enough. Subrah's just made a comment as well in the chat box that there are...
Chris. Sorry, Chris,
Michael, go on.
Just jump in there, yeah. There is a webinar going on tomorrow to deal with that. And, a lot of people have had sort of, domestic troubles, children all being together, employees and employers dealing with issues at a level and a type that they never usually have to. So we got the 2 meter or the 1 meter rule sorted out, maybe, and the hand washing, but there's a lot of other things coming to the surface that could seriously impact. What I'll do, if I may, is drop a link to that webinar on the chat box if anybody wants to participate in that.
That's fine, no problem at all, that, Michael, and thanks very much for that. And it's important that we don't forget the human bit of this in amongst all the economic side of things as well. And again, I know Subrah's mentioned this in the past, that this really is a crisis like no other, where you've got that mix of absolutely everything in there, from the personal bit right through to the financial bit. So that's absolutely important. Just going back from the point of view of the money left over in the local authority grants, there is about £62 million in there. We do get regular updates, primarily through national government, over what's been spent and what hasn't. There's about 62 million left over there. A couple of questions. Dan Anderson's asked whether it's not evenly spread, and John Jones has mentioned about the tight deadline on Manchester. Part of the issue we've got here is that each local authority area has got individual and different sized pots of money. So obviously you'd expect there in Manchester city centre, they've obviously got probably the lion's share of what Greater Manchester has got. The other complication in this is that all local authorities are doing almost their own things and on different timetables with this. So it's been quite difficult to try and work out what's been going on. One of the big things I'm involved with is the Economic Recovery Group, which is pulling together all the various local authorities, the chambers involved, other business organisations. And on a Wednesday morning call, we find out, you know, the latest information on this. And some local authorities have been really good at getting the money out the door very quickly, others less so. But the trouble is, they're all operating at different timetables. So, for example, Manchester, I think, closed theirs a couple of weeks ago. They may be going for a second round. I think Oldham are currently still in operation. So, again, it's really a case of just keeping your eye on the information that the Chamber's supplying. We're trying to keep on top of that and let businesses know in each district as and when that money is available. I think the line to take is, if you're not quite sure, you think you're eligible for it, then apply for it. That's not to say you will definitely get your money, but that money is there really. We've got a comment there from David, I think, on the cultural sector. David, do you want to unmute yourself and obviously just give us your view on this? I know you've raised this a couple of times, but I think it's an absolutely crucial part of the economic impact here in Manchester.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Thanks, David.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep mentioning it until you include the word culture as well as hospitality in your précis. Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, obviously I have a particular interest in the Hallé Orchestra, but the whole sector, large and small, from, you know, the biggest venues in Manchester like the Arena through to all the local venues like that people love to go to, music, theatre, large and small, all of that is, you know, is going to be a long time before you see audiences coming back into a 2,000-seater venue, and those organisations are only commercially viable if they get more than, you know, 25% capacity of their capacity used. So I think it's an area where there is no alternative, but government has to come up with some additional help, whether it's sectoral specific or an extension of the furlough or a funding for investment. And when they do, if they do come up with that, and I hope they will, we need to make sure it's looked at nationally, not just a London solution for, you know, the Royal Opera House and the like. It needs to be recognising the importance of that whole and the whole breadth of cultural offer for a city like Manchester.
I think it's absolutely right, David, and point noted around the hospitality and culture bit and everything. You know, we've got to include that, because that is an absolutely fundamental part. You know, people go on about the musical heritage of the city. Well, where do you hear those performances? And that's one of the key things, isn't it? Well, one of the things I read the other day was this idea. There's been a question asked in the House of Lords around the furloughing of space, which sounds a bit of an odd thing. But if you think about it, it's primarily designed when you've got large venues that aren't currently being used. And is there a way you can almost furlough that space? So is there a mechanism you could look at to say, well, actually, it should be so much money coming in, there isn't at present, and that should actually form the basis of ongoing government support. So it's almost like, instead of being paid not to work, it's almost being paid not to have people in your venue. Could you see something like that being of use? Obviously, it is that direct government intervention.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'd like to think that whatever intervention they brought in would encourage innovation and ideas and different ways of doing things, and I wouldn't want it to be, you know, discouraging people from trying to open up these venues. I mean, I think a lot of it is around social distancing and people's psychology, and you know, whether the fear factor has got too strong. That sounds a pretty expensive solution, and but you know, so I think it would have to be something that encouraged venues to open up and do different things to sort of lead the way back.
Okay, that's great, that, David. Thanks very much for that, and it's interesting, and obviously watch this space, because it is something, as we work our way through all the various sectors and everything, it becomes, you know, increasingly near the top of the list if it's not there already. I've got a comment from Paul Winterbottom on the chat around cash flow. Paul, do you want to just say a few words about that? Because this is really important. We've seen it's caused a problem, but, you know, we need to keep our eye on what's coming up as well, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And Subrah, thanks for sharing what you've done. That's some great insight there. I think those of us on the call that have perhaps been around the block a little bit and seen what happens at the end of previous recessions will know that very often when the light appears to be at the end of the tunnel, and at the very point when businesses are starting to get orders and feel that they've turned the corner and, you know, better times are ahead, that can be the vital moment when actually they run out of cash reserves. And having been in that place, I think there are things that can be done to help people anticipate that. So a couple of thoughts in particular are, there will be a lot of businesses in GM who have taken advantage of deferring VAT. So that means at some point in the not too distant future, there'll be 2 quarters when there'll be a time when they have to pay 2 quarters VAT. And that could be a bit of a shock. There are businesses who've deferred PAYE. There'll be businesses who used to enjoy certain terms of trade with customers or suppliers and find that actually to fulfill those new orders, maybe their clients will want to pay more slowly and need more time, and their suppliers will actually want to be paid more quickly. And unless those things are really thought through and modelled really in a cash flow forecast, it's very easy for businesses to believe that they will be okay and the reality be very different. It's a conversation I'm having with my clients, but clearly, you know, with 5,000 members, I feel that there's an opportunity for GM to take a bit of a lead and maybe help to educate members about this impending problem in such a way that they can be aware of it, take advantage of, you know, some of the skills that exist within the wider community of the chamber, and therefore plan for it and anticipate it. And I say that in particular because I know there are a lot of businesses who are saying, you know, should I be taking a bounce back loan? I think I'm all right at the moment. Should I be applying for a CBILS loan? And actually with some proper projections and forecast, the answer to that will be much clearer. And actually businesses can really anticipate that cash flow hole that they might need to plug in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, we've said for a while, you know, it's like any recession. While this one is sort of seems to be deeper and more harsh than some of the others we've faced, it's coming out of recession that most businesses go bust for that point. You know, they've not literally, you know, the cash has run out really. So I think it's important. Is there anybody on from membership who wants to pick that point up? Because we are getting a lot of offers, aren't we, from various businesses and members to help other members through these times with various things. So I don't know if anybody wants to reply just on Paul's point there about maybe this could be something we start to look at to help our members going forward. Lewis or Lucy or Reet?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that we've seen moving through this time, and we've had a lot of member feedback, and one of the things that the membership team have tried to do in particular is listen to what members are looking for. We've already started to do a bit of this with kind of the marketing strategy in terms of what members need support with and what members can offer. And, you know, one of the main purposes of the chamber is to be that connector. That's definitely something that we'll look at, and we'll probably put more time into doing things like this moving forward and making it a solid part of the membership offer.
Okay, thanks very much, Lucy, for that. And again, you know, this is the time now when we need to hear from people about what they actually want, and then we can quickly turn that around into action going forward. So thanks very much for that.
Chris, just one point on that. What I would say is, I think that businesses won't be some businesses won't be asking for this because they don't appreciate the need for it.
Yeah.
So I think there's an opportunity to be more proactive and encourage people to be thinking about this rather than waiting to be asked.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point there. We've got Michael as well. He's just said that Michael Morris, maybe some sort of recovery committee or something to try and plug into things. Again, this is what we want to do through this activity and the way forward document, to really get people thinking about this, talking about it, but then match up with experience and what you might want to see. So that's a really good point, Michael. Thanks very much for that. I'm just conscious of time. We've just got a couple of minutes left. So like I said, what we will do after this is send out the report with all the numbers and results from the QES. I think on the back of the official government figures that were released last week, it's probably not come as too much of a shock to people, although seeing it almost in black and white and looking at it from a sector basis, there's a few things in there which really do cause a few eyebrows to raise and an awful lot of concern to be caused, really. But again, the purpose behind this is to set the scene and say to people, yes, we are, this is the situation we're starting with, but then B, to use this to build on going forwards and do things in a lot more engaging way right across the whole of the business community and even beyond the business community as well, to find out what those key issues are and to speak to as many people as we possibly can do to get that evidence, to start to look at what practical bits we really need to do to take forward. And again, comments still coming through on the chat there. Tony Nugent did a cash flow exercise right at the beginning, set the baseline there, and things are either worse or better than anticipated. Again, some experience from people, Graham Dixon in particular, about looking for bounce back loans and experiences that people are having as well. So it's all important we gather as much information as we possibly can. The QES is a crucial part of that, but it's sometimes those little stories that we need as well that really help us when we're speaking to officials either locally in Greater Manchester or at a national government level as well. We're there or thereabouts now, right on 12 o'clock. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Like I said, that's the first time we've done something like this. We've got some great ideas, and like I said, that sort of recovery group is actually, a really, really good idea. And just right now, we've got the economic shock out of the way. What do we need to do going forward? And let's just not do it in a way that we address the immediate problems of COVID-19. Let's look a lot longer term and let's sort out some of those problems we've had before COVID hit us. How can we do that going forward? If we can do that, then something positive really, really will have come out of these harrowing times that we're in at the present moment in time. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to Subrah for once again explaining things in an absolutely superb way. Thank you all for all your participation and look out for the further information we'll do as a follow-up. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. Thank you very much.